David Daoud is a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defence of Democracies. Welcome to the programme. First of all, we heard there from President Biden, who was fairly optimistic that those so-called gaps can be narrowed. Are you as optimistic?
Thank you for having me on. I'm rarely that optimistic, and I think there's already reports of some snags. Hamas has publicly criticized the offers on the table. Now, American officials have said not to take that at face value. But at the same time, there are unbridgeable gaps in the positions between the Israelis and Hamas that we've seen in the past. We're talking about the identity of hostages to be released in exchange for what Palestinian security prisoners are going to be released, the number of hostages to be released, and what phases they're going to be released, how many of them are going to be living versus not still alive. This has been a snag that's been in the past. I wouldn't see that this would necessarily change. There's also the issue that Israel's objectives in Gaza to dismantle Hamas militarily and as a governmental structure has not necessarily changed. This is obviously something Hamas cannot live with. They're not going to agree to surrender. And where we have seen progress, there have been Israeli reports that have said there has been progress on certain issues, but it's really been between Israel and the mediators rather than between Israel and Hamas. So there are perhaps signals for optimism, but I think there are equal signals that caution against the type of optimism that President Biden is presenting in his speech.
And David, I was speaking to a commentator earlier who suggested that one of the challenges is that President Biden's clock is ticking in terms of the time he's got left on his presidency. So he is going at a greater pace than perhaps Israel or Hamas want to go at for various different reasons on either side.
That's perhaps true. I mean, President Biden has handed over the torch for the 2024 election to his current vice president, Kamala Harris. And he may want to give her a clean slate to start with when she's competing against former President Trump in the general election. He might want to wrap up this Gaza issue that is putting a strain on the coalition that he built ahead of the 2020 election. So it very much is so, could be so. Whereas Israel's considerations, its security, whether a deal with Hamas could guarantee not just return to an October 6th situation, but real security, real permanent ceasefire in the genuine sense of the term. These things may be working at cross ends, or like you said, the timeline might not be overlapping. Again, Hamas also has its own considerations. It wants to survive. It wants to rebuild, as its leadership has stated over the course of this 10-month war, and they plan to continue attacking the Israelis in the future. So we have three different positions here, three different interests. And it's going to probably take a little bit more effort to get them to overlap.
And David, you talk about three different interests. And of course, there's something else in the background here, which is, of course, the region on high alert for some kind of retaliation from Iran.
Well, it's not just Iran, it's the broader resistance axis and primarily Hezbollah. But this, in some ways, the negotiations could be looked at from this perspective, not just between Israel and Hamas, but between the broader resistance axis, this Iranian-led regional alliance, and the Israelis. The Hezbollah, for example, has set as its objective from the outset that a precondition to it ceasing its attacks that it initiated against Israel on October 8th is that there's a ceasefire in Gaza. Once that happens, Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah said this November 3rd on his first speech after the onset of the current war. And in July, he again reiterated this, that once there's a ceasefire in Gaza, Hezbollah will cease its attacks. Now, matters have become complicated over the past few weeks with the strike that happened from Hezbollah that killed 12 Israeli children, the Israeli counterstrike, and the assassination of Haniyeh. Now, this puts us in a position where the resistance axis, which I don't think wants a war with Israel now, they're not in the stage where they can launch this promised regional war that would degrade Israel out of existence. This is still a long-term project. They'd rather avoid a full confrontation now. But these two assassinations and their public nature put them in a position where they have to strike at the Israelis in a pretty painful fashion. And that could put the region on a path to conflict. Now, the ceasefire negotiations, their prior commitment to ceasing fire themselves, if there's a ceasefire in Gaza, could give them an off-ramp. They could say, well, look, we forced the Israelis through these support fronts, as they've been calling them, to stop their attack on Gaza. We won. We've already started to see this narrative from Iraqi Shia militias that are allied with Iran. And that for them could be sufficient to save face and obviate the need for the responses for either Fuad Shukr, the Hezbollah military commander that was killed in Beirut by the Israelis, or for Ismail Haniyeh, who was assassinated in Tehran.
Okay, David Daoud, thank you so much for taking us through your thoughts on this story.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, the UN says pauses in fighting